morning, DawgNation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. Glad you are here. Georgia spring practice is underway. SEC basketball tournament begins tonight. So much going on. We're going to do our part, the best we can to cover all of it with you here today. That means two guests, Mike Griffith coming up in a moment, Davin Bellamy later on. We are all over all of that. Also, for now, it is your thoughts, your comments. We'll let you give us that here right now as well. So we are heavy into it all at the moment. In the show itself, coming up in a moment. So I have to say, I was really, really surprised that something from Kirby Smart yesterday, if you are not aware, we did hear from Kirby yesterday, first time in a long time, in his introductory press conference kickoff spring practice. He said something that I thought was, frankly, pretty remarkable, given what maybe I would have expected him to say or what perhaps I was hoping he would say. And I have to say, we'll do all of this here in a moment. The reaction thus far has not quite been what I thought it would be. So we will give you that here coming up in a moment. Randy Hall says, how about your all-time offensive line? I don't know that I can give you that right now, but that seems like a pretty fun one to talk about. Maybe we'll hit that back up for our RS Andrews cooldown at the end of the show. Certainly, there have been a lot of good ones. You're going to go back a long time ago, guys like Guy McIntyre, recent years, guys like Andrew Thomas. It would be an interesting thing to look at how many guys from kind of this era have made that. You would presume a lot, and how many of the long-standing guys would also make that. Low Country Dog says, Pro Day is an excellent day for Falcons executives to drive 90 minutes to Athens and ignore the best players in the world, which is a very funny thing for Low Country Dog to say. I appreciate that. Very, very funny indeed. Bill Camacho checking in. Ohio Dog. Boy, I feel like we hadn't seen our buddy Ohio Dog in a while. He says, Ohio State may have won a title, but the only thing they're champions of is whining, which is very funny. Greg Dog says, when it comes to Kirby, I'd like to see more locker room excitement speeches from him about his players and his program. Yeah, every now and then, Georgia's good enough to sort of share some of that with us. It's always really entertaining when they do. But, yeah, some of the best stuff, obviously. UGA Marine says, I find it funny that Matt Rule says they're canceling spring game because of tampering and then says he gets 15 players a year from the portal. Is he worried about his tampering or other teams tampering? I think that's a very fair question indeed. Let's say hello to our YouTube people here just for a moment, see how they're doing as they check in here today. Busy show on tap. Lewis Sutherland checking in to say good morning, Dog Nation. Porter checking in. Brodo Baggins in here today. Texas Dog in here today. Bobby Bryan showing up here today. You love to see that. George Wrigley showing up here today, too. So a lot of Georgia fans getting ready for a good one here today. We'll say hello to our Facebook people here, too. Then after that, we'll get ready to get it started. I think it's going to be a pretty fun, spirited show. Kirby Smart giving a response yesterday to those who've expressed some criticism about the Georgia coaching staff. We'll share some of that with you here in just a little bit. Edwina Atwood checking in. Edwina, we're glad to see you. Marshall Fleming checking in. You love seeing Marshall in here today. Tennille Calvino, great to see her. William J.B., Kirk Schultz, Gary Holt. A lot of recognizable names in here. Susan Kornblut. Yeah, you just feel really good. Roy checking in. Gary Holt. Yeah, all kinds of good stuff. Matthew Goodwin writes in to say, my daughter's a freshman at Georgia and heard Kirby on the loudspeaker yesterday yelling at the offensive line, run! This is football. Quit jumping off sides. Very funny by Matthew on that. And, yeah, if you're ever around there, it's kind of funny. For as secretive as Kirby is, does not seem to mind that microphone that he uses just bellowing all over campus. I mean, it's loud. And it's one of those things that sometimes it's just loud and you can't really make it out. Other times it's loud enough to sort of tell as, what it was that he was saying. There have been a couple of these moments. It's interesting that Smart is kind of okay with that, just given the fact that, generally speaking, he likes a certain degree of secrecy. So all of that really interesting. It's almost 10 a.m. We'll do your comments, at least a version of those when we're done here today as a part of our R.S. Andrews cooldown. But for now, let's bring on everybody and let them know what we're about to do for today's show. Let's fire up that animation. Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We are so happy that you are with us here today. Georgia kicked off spring practice yesterday. We have a lot on that. Obviously, Kirby offered a defense against those who maybe thought that there should have been some coaching changes here this offseason. Kirby going to tell us today why he trusts his staff and why he believes the continuity they have there could perhaps be a very good thing for Georgia here today. Also got a couple of guests, Mike Griffith, and of course, we always love it when Davin Bellamy stops by. We'll get to that coming up a little bit later on the program. And to kick things off, I have to be honest about something. I was a little bit surprised by, I guess, the lack of reaction to something that Kirby Smart said yesterday that I thought was incredibly meaningful. I want to start with this just because I'm not seeing enough of this other places, and sometimes I guess it's our job to do what we're not hearing other people talk about. So we'll do that here today. We are glad you are with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
This does not happen very much, but yesterday it did. I was pretty surprised by the reaction, or maybe the better way to say this is the lack of reaction to something that Kirby Smart said yesterday. Now, we set you up for this with our program, which was the fact that, we're going to hear from Kirby for the first time in a long time, that we haven't really heard anything from Kirby Smart since, the Sugar Bowl. And so a press conference that kicks off spring practice, there's just going to be a lot to cover. We predicted there'd be a long injury update, and there was. We predicted there would be discussion about the coaches returning, and there was. In fact, we'll get to that here coming up in just a few minutes' time. A lot of the stuff that we said there would be, there kind of was. And so therefore, long press conference like this, and Smart actually did a press conference that was a little longer than normal because he wanted to address some of the Pro Day stuff, which is actually going on in the midst of our show. We may even show you some of the images from Pro Day throughout our day here today. So Smart does kind of a long press conference yesterday, and because of all that's being said, what you end up doing is sort of flooding the zone with all sorts of Georgia information, and we run into the same issue that everybody else does. There's not enough bandwidth to sort of cover everything in detail the way that it deserves, like right out of the gate. Takes a few days to get to some of this stuff. But there was one thing for me in terms of everything that happened yesterday that I thought was probably more meaningful than anything else, and it relates to what I think is a tradition and something we've talked about a lot the last couple of weeks, that is the annual spring game known as G-Day. Now, let's walk through the timeline on this just a bit. We know various coaches have sort of expressed their concerns about having spring games and have flat out announced their declaration not to have them. Matt Rule, Nebraska, Steve Sarkisian, Texas, I guess Lincoln Riley, USC, Kalen DeBoer, Alabama. All of these coaches in one form or another have sort of talked about a little bit of a distaste now for the traditional spring game. Yet we've had reason to believe that while other programs were doing this, Georgia would join the Clemsons and the Tennessees and those sorts of programs that still are pretty committed to spring games as we've known them. And one of the reasons we felt that way is because if you want to go back a couple of weeks ago at the winter athletic board meeting for UGA, Georgia Athletic Director Josh Brooks, being asked about G-Day, spoke on behalf of Kirby Smart there to say, hey, listen, this is still a tradition we really value at Georgia. This is something we think has meaning for us as an athletic program. Let's hear Brooks on that from a couple of weeks ago.
We're still full planning on G-Days this year. You got to take it year to year on things like that. But I can say one thing I appreciate about Coach Smart is that he understands the value of the game, and it is an opportunity for some of our fans to come see Georgia play that may not be able to have season tickets. So it's always been a special day, and I think it's in the plans for this year. And as everything goes, you take it day by day, month on month, year by year for the future.
So that's Brooks sort of, I guess, vouching for G-Day. But if you listen carefully, there are a couple of things that jump out. First of all, he says, hey, we take it day by day, month by month, year by year. In other words, even in saying there will be a G-Day, that's not necessarily a ringing endorsement for the event's future. And even at the beginning of that clip, he says, hey, we're planning on having this. It kind of reminds me of, like, I grew up a big sports talk fan. That's, what I do for a living is because that's what I grew up loving. And old days, y'all know who Jim Rome is, longtime sports radio host. He's still doing his show, but kind of the Jim Rome era goes back to sort of probably the 90s or whatever. And I used to listen to that show all the time. And one of the things that Rome used to always say is if you've got a guest coming on, an interview guest coming on, and he's coming on, you're like, hey, we're going to have Davin Bellamy coming up at 10:45. Like, when he's coming on, you're very specific about it. But if you've been trying to reach out and confirm and that guy haven't gotten back to you yet, all of a sudden now the guest is scheduled to appear. It's one of those things of, if we're not sure he's coming up, it's scheduled to appear. For some reason, I can't help but think about that when Josh Brooks says, we're planning on having G-Day. G-Day is scheduled for whatever day. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, we think we're doing this, year to year, you never know, but for now, it's still on the schedule. We're still planning to do it. So even in supporting G-Day and saying that Kirby Smart sees the value in it, it's still what I would describe as not exactly the most ringing endorsement for all of this. And the other thing that Brooks mentions there, and this is really the most important part, I think, because, listen, I'm a G-Day homer. I am a G-Day partisan. I am somebody who wants the spring game to exist. And my reasons for doing so are obvious. I tell you this all the time, is that when I have, like, biases, I try to make you very aware of what my biases are. I try not to sneak those past you. I'm not trying to, like, pull the wool over your eyes. I have a very strong G-Day bias for probably one really big reason. Like, as a child, I have a lot of really fond memories of G-Day. When I think about my sort of origin story as a Georgia fan, even though I was lucky enough to go to the regular games when I was pretty young, thinking back to G-Day when it was a little bit more casual, a little bit more relaxed, a little easier maneuver, going to those games when I was really young is a big part of how I grew to be such a big Georgia fan. And what's cool is now I've lived long enough that I've seen my own children have a very similar experience to what I had, especially my son, who just probably likes college football more than my daughter does. When he got old enough to start going to G-Day, a little bit of a hassle to take young kids to the regular games, but a little easier to take them to G-Day. And, like, that's when he sort of started falling in love with college football a little bit like I would have, way back when I was a kid. It's kind of cool to live long enough to sort of see your children do something very similar and have a very similar experience to what you had. Like, that's just sort of my story. And so when Josh Brooks says, hey, G-Day is an event for our fans, especially those who might not get to come to some of the games in the fall, either because they have young kids, because it's gotten so dadgum expensive, whatever the reasons are, G-Day sort of exists for them. And if we're being completely honest, probably more valuable in that regard than the actual training for the football team itself. We've never made G-Day more than it is from an actual from an actual player performance standpoint that Georgia could probably be the same level of good during the fall even without a spring game. We've always sort of acknowledged that. But G-Day does, we believe, still have incredible value for all the reasons I just mentioned, because it kind of helps cultivate that next generation of Georgia fan, which brings us to Kirby Smart from yesterday. Sort of late in the press conference, the question was asked about the value of spring games, just sort of given that being kind of a hot topic. And I got to tell you, and I'm not mad at Kirby. I'm not criticizing Kirby. Kirby's job is to win games in the fall. His job is not to entertain me during the spring. I'm really not trying to make this more than it needs to be. Very, very intent not to do that. But I'm also the kind of person that's used to sort of sitting here and being honest with you. And just being as honest as I can be, I was devastated to hear Kirby give such a lukewarm, sort of tepid defense of spring games, and to only, in the softest terms possible, count himself as still being in favor of them. In fact, I want you to listen to this closely. This is the part that I'm surprised, at least in the last 12 hours or so, 24 hours now, hasn't gotten more attention than it has. the fact that to my ears, it sounds like Kirby's not even fully 100% confirming we'll even have a G-Day this year, even though it's technically on the schedule. Like, I was just so disappointed by all of this. So let me let you hear Kirby. It's just slightly more than a minute, a little longer than we normally play. Asked about spring games. He says he likes them, but ... And it's the stuff that comes after that that obviously matters more than anything else. This is Kirby Smart from yesterday.
First of all, I think there's a lot of – everybody wants to talk about that and make it about the portal and make it about this decision to not or have spring games based on the fluidity of players. I don't know that that's every coach's reason. There's a lot of coaches that didn't like the spring game before the portal ever came about. Everybody has different approaches. My approach has been I like to have spring football games, but that's every year we make that decision based on where we are. We haven't even practiced yet. So, it would be remiss if I said 100% I'm dead set we're having a spring game. I leave every option open. That's my 15th practice. So we can do what we want to do. We're planning to have a spring game. I've talked to Josh Brooks about it several times. We've had conversation, but that doesn't mean it can't change. Last year, I think Kentucky didn't have any defensive linemen healthy. They weren't able to have a spring game. So we don't know. Like, I can't forecast the future to know exactly what's going to happen 15 days from now. I do know we have to get better, and we've got to practice football. So when that happens, as it goes, we spread ours out over more time than most people. We have 5 weeks, and we have 3 practices a week. So we want to try to get recovery and stay healthy so we can have really good practices. But I like spring games. I want to have a spring game. I think it's important because you allow kids to play that don't typically get to play. You sometimes allow fans to enjoy an experience in Athens that they normally wouldn't get. But I'm not ready to say that it's 100%.
I mean, maybe this means more to me than it does the average person. That's entirely possible. That's true. But gosh, I was so disappointed to hear that. And once again, Kirby's job is to win games in the fall. His job is not necessarily just to keep us entertained during this time of year. But 2 things I'll say real quick. There is value in goodwill. And goodwill is not necessary as long as you're winning every game. But nobody wins games forever. And so as a program, I do think there is some value in looking around and saying, hey, what are we doing to conjure goodwill? What are we doing to sort of create a good vibe for those that are not necessarily in like the richest category of fans? Like, how are we keeping the larger, broader fan base happy? Not because that directly connects to winning games this fall, but at a certain point in time, every organization, no matter what it is, needs to dip into sort of a reservoir of goodwill. I won't give you specific examples here because it kind of gets a little bit more specific than I want to get, but all organizations are sort of hoping they've sort of built up. For instance, if you're an airline, all of a sudden you haven't been charging for bags forever. Now you are charging for bags. You're sort of hoping that you've built up enough goodwill over the years to kind of allow people to sort of be okay with that. Like, every now and then, every organization needs some goodwill, including Georgia football. And things like G-Day or the old picture day or, even like what used to be like, say, National Signing Day, when a lot of fans would kind of get together in downtown Athens. All of these are little small things that just sort of conjure a little bit of goodwill. And that's one of those things you don't really need until you do need it. But when you do need it, you're sort of glad you have it. And if you don't have the little free add-ons or very inexpensive add-ons to the Georgia fan experience, then where is that goodwill going to come from when you do truly need it? And every organization needs it eventually. Perhaps more on that here coming up just in a moment. The other thing I'll say is this too. It's interesting, in the clip we heard from Brooks from a couple of weeks ago and the clip we heard from Kirby right there, they both sort of reference the fan experience of fans that can't really come to anything else. And this is more than just sort of a magnanimous gesture of like charity on the part of Georgia to say, hey, we're going to give this very inexpensive or free thing for the fans that can't afford all the big time stuff. This is also one of those things that any sort of large scale, lucrative organization has to consider. Like, Georgia tickets are an expensive proposition right now. And that's not anybody's fault. It's just sort of the basic economics of supply and demand. College football is really fun. Georgia's really good. Therefore, the demand for the ticket is going to be really high, and that drives up the price. Basic economics, you understand all of that. But there's also kind of an unintended consequence of that basic economics. Ask yourself this question. In fact, look around in the stadium. You can observe this. So given the financial demands of the best, most sought-after Georgia tickets, ask yourself this. What station of life are people typically in to be able to afford those tickets? The median ticket buyer, I'm assuming for Georgia, is a good bit older than me, for instance. Certainly a good bit older than some of you. And so any healthy organization would be thinking about, okay, well, if our best customers now are in a, little bit of a different season of life, then where's the next generation of Georgia fan coming from? How do we build up the next generation of fan so that as our, sort of best ticket buyers now eventually kind of, perhaps age out and move on and ready to do something else with their lives, how do we have a new crop of younger fans ready to step in and buy those tickets? Making the decision for how you cultivate those young fans is an important part of a healthy organization. It's I talked about that before. I became a fan by attending events like this. My kids became a fan by sort of attending events like this. And having the sort of free, low-cost, easy access opportunities to kind of enrich your Georgia fandom is just a really good way to make sure you've got a next generation of Georgia fans standing by when there are need to sort of replace the very, very rich ticket buyers who are kind of keeping you in business here right now. That's just a good, healthy organization. However, all of that said, I totally acknowledge that that's not necessarily what I want Kirby Smart thinking about right now. What I want Kirby Smart thinking about is how do you win as many games as you can this fall? Outreach for the next generation of Georgia fan, that needs to be left for somebody else, but somebody else should be considering that. And perhaps it shouldn't be all that surprising at a time in which almost everybody seems to be growing skeptical of spring games. And as Kirby correctly points out, a lot of coaches have felt this way for a long time. Perhaps it's not surprising that Georgia's also moving in this direction. But just because it's not surprising doesn't mean that it isn't disappointing. I love this event. I want it to always exist. But if we're being honest, I can't guarantee that it always will. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We are glad you're with us, no matter how you get to us. Video, 10 a.m., radio, Athens Sports Radio 960, the Ref podcast. The feedback so far has been outstanding, especially from our Apple podcast subscribers, folks who've been with us now for, about a decade. It sounds like the tinkering and the working under the hood, the coding stuff, which, golly, that bores me to tears. But it sounds like all of that stuff that we've been working on the last few days has worked well, and now our Apple podcasts are back delivering exactly what they're supposed to be, which is a thrill for me. The point is, however you access our show, we work really hard to make it as available as we can on as many platforms as we can in as much of like a frictionless experience as we can possibly make it. So it sounds like we're back to normal on that again, and I am thrilled about all of that. I'm also incredibly grateful to our friends at Breda Pest Management who make today's show possible. The official pest control provider of UGA Athletics, that is what Breda Pest Management is. That means when we're all hopefully in Sanford Stadium coming up in a few weeks for G-Day, when you look around, what's keeping this place bug-free, critter-free, termite-free? It's our friends from Breda Pest Management. And they can do the same thing for you and your home as well. In Georgia, you know this, termites just a fact of life. Everybody has had them, will get them. That's just the way it goes when you live here in our great state. So having great termite protection, you already know this is incredibly important. But you're perhaps looking at the company you're with right now, and you may be thinking, I don't know if this company's really doing right by me right now. Well, make the decision to switch to Breda Pest Management. You'll get a higher level of service, and you'll get it for an even better price. So much so, you're going to put money back in your pocket just for making that decision. It's literally like your own NIL deal, just putting that money in your pocket because our folks from Breda are going to take better care of you at a better price. That's why I want you to find them online, BredaPest.com, BREDA, BredaPest.com, the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics, and they can be your pest control provider as well. Of course, don't forget this sort of spring time of year. You get those like flying squirrels and things like that start messing around. Stuff like that horrifies me, but it does exist, and then Brady can help you out on all of that too. Okay, we got Davin Bellamy later on. That's going to be fun. Mike Griffith here coming up in a moment. He en route to the SEC basketball tournament in Nashville gets going today. But prior to that, I want to go around the doghouse. And it's presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau, by the way. And I mentioned the phrase a moment ago, goodwill. Every now and then, every organization just needs a little bit of goodwill. You hope you've built up some vibes that you can utilize when you need it. Some trust, if you want to say it that way. Well, I would say that right now, perhaps Georgia is dipping into some of that trust, dipping into some of that goodwill that, hey, Kirby Smart's done right by us before, fans might say. And so we're going to give him a little bit of grace to assume that he's doing right by us right now, even if our instincts suggest that's not necessarily true. You already know, hottest story of the offseason, we said this on Friday, now too large to ignore. And some people push back on me for saying this, but I do believe I'm right. I don't believe it's the majority of Georgia fans who want to see Mike Bobo or Stacey Searels replaced. I think the majority of Georgia fans have no opinion at all. The majority of Georgia fans are just sort of fine with whatever. That's just kind of the nature of something like this. But it is a very, very loud faction, loud enough to be noticed, Paul Feinbaum and others making mention of it, that are saying, boy, a year ago, the offensive deficiencies, struggles with the offensive line, overall production for the unit overall, that points to some problems with coaching. You've heard that said. Maybe you are saying it loud enough that Kirby had to be asked about it yesterday. We predicted that he would. Turned out to be that way. And Smart pushed back on that by saying to anybody who might doubt otherwise that he absolutely believes he's got the best coaches he could have working for him at Georgia right now. This is what Kirby Smart said about that.
To be honest with you, I don't get into it much. I worked in a place for 10 years before I came here, and it's my 10th spring, so that's 20 years that, you know, I really don't pay much attention to anything outside. I got a lot of confidence in this organization, the foundation we've built. I've got the best staff in the country, and I have no doubt about that. I've got one of the most experienced SEC staffs there is, and to be honest with you, there's a lot of confidence in that, and I have a lot of confidence in it.
We've talked before about the idea of, like, quote unquote, trust Kirby. And, you know, it's a line you hear, you know, fans use from time to time of, hey, you just got to trust Kirby. I've told you this before. I really don't trust anybody other than my family. I have a weird hang up. I probably have what you might call trust issues, something like that. I don't have a lot of trust to give in life. It doesn't seem like, I guess I'm a very cynical person, probably unfairly so, but I'm not big on trusting anybody. And so I'm not going to sit here in this chair as a Georgia fan, speaking to other Georgia fans, and say, hey, you got to trust Kirby. Frankly, as far as I'm concerned, you don't have to trust anybody. You can, what was the old Ronald Reagan line? You can trust but verify, or you can just not trust at all. You know, that's your business. Do what you want to. I would say, though, while I don't necessarily trust anyone, I do extend respect. And Kirby may not have my trust because I don't know that anybody outside my home does. But he does have my respect, and that's respect earned through a track record of success, a couple of national championships, a lot of wins, elevating a Georgia program to a higher height, obviously so, elevating Georgia as a program to a higher height than it was before he took the job. And so, therefore, that performance generates a level of respect from me that if Smart gives his endorsement in this situation to his offensive coordinator, Mike Bobo, or the other coaches on his staff, the respect I have for Kirby kind of turns itself into belief of, well, if Kirby says it, it must be true because look how successful that he's been. However, I'm also like a lot of you too, in that I'm going to be watching pretty closely here. And I'm going to see, does Kirby end up being right about this? And, you know, a lot of the kind of goodwill, at least a portion of the goodwill, to use the same phrase again, at least a portion of the goodwill that Kirby's established at Georgia, he's at least putting a portion of this on the line by, you know, vouching the way that he did for his coaches yesterday, especially just given how intense the competition in college football is right now. The SEC's never been deeper. The challenge of winning a championship has never been more difficult. You want to make sure you've got everything firing in the right direction to have as much success as you can, and any blemish has a tendency to just run the risk of ruining your season. for Smart to say, we believe we have the best coaching staff in America, there's a certain level of performance that you expect when a successful coach like this vouches for his staff in such a forceful manner. And to go on here for a moment, Smart also talking about the fact that for the very first time in his tenure as Georgia coach, and this is of his own choosing, all of the Georgia assistant coaches are coming back. And as Smart says it, that level of continuity, he believes, is a very valuable thing for his program this fall. Once again, here is Kirby Smart.
I think we built our program around retention. I think we've got the most stable, not only staff, but stable organization in all of college football. And I think that's what we've hung our hat on, is we have stability, we have retention, we have a great foundation. We're built to last. We don't have to worry about year in, year out, tons of change. I think this league will chew you up and spit you out. This league is brutal when you look across, and I'm sitting in an SEC head coaches meeting, and there's Stoops and I are the most tenured guys, and there's a lot of guys that are in their first 3 or 4 years. And then you look at their staffs, and there's tremendous amounts of turnover, and then you look at their rosters, and there's even more turnover. So who does the best job retaining their players and coaches? I take a lot of pride in that, and I think that's one of our weapons.
Listen, I actually believe Kirby on that. I think that's probably true, that, to use his phrase, it is a weapon to have that level of stability. The fact that you're okay remaining stable does give you a leg up over some other SEC teams for whom that's just not going to be true. I think all that's correct. And yet there is also a high level of performance demanded by that too. And, frankly, I do believe that Georgia can achieve that here this year. But you can't deny, based on the noise we've heard in our comment section or on social media or wherever you gather with other Georgia fans, based on the noise, people are watching this very closely right now, and they're going to be judging. Is Kirby Smart, was his prediction correct? Was his assessment correct? Is Georgia still moving in the right direction after a little bit of a hiccup in 2024? People will be leaning in and ready to notice that. And that is Around the Doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. Now, we love Georgia Farm Bureau because they have for a long time supported a group of people that really matter to us. You think about, the great history in Georgia of like agriculture, the food on our plates. Georgia feeds the world in many ways. And the farmers that help grow that food are just some of our favorite people. And so we like organizations that support them. That's what Georgia Farm Bureau has done for a very long time. But in addition to that, the great level of service that Georgia Farm Bureau has provided to our agricultural folks, they can provide that for you now too. When it comes to your insurance needs, you got to have auto insurance, you got to have life, home insurance, perhaps life insurance, all kinds of these insurance products. You have to have it, and so you want to work with good people to help supply that for you, who are kind and service oriented. That's what our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau are all about. We say it all the time. They're always the home team. Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team in Georgia, taking care of Georgians, and they're standing by to take care of you. So give them a call, 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050. You can also find them online, gfbinsurance.com. Reach out, talk to them about all of your options. I think you'll come to agree with what we've been saying. Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team and a big part of Around the Doghouse here on DawgNation Daily. All right, it is Davin Bellamy coming up. Fun conversation with him. But for now, everything else happening around UGA, including Pro Day going today, spring practice starting yesterday, and much more. Let's talk to Mike Griffith here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We'll say hello to Mike Griffith. Of course, SEC basketball tournament tonight in Nashville for the Dogs. We'll get to that in a moment. Mike going to be a part of that. Day, Mike, also Pro Day in Athens at the indoor complex. We got some video we'll be showing throughout the day of some of the stuff happening for the Georgia Pro Day here, as the former Dogs kind of make their big impression on the NFL scouts here. I guess give me a little bit of a preview of this event as it is ongoing, kind of what you're expecting to see here. Georgia still in the mix with Jalen Walker, Mikael Williams, Malachi Starks, possibility of 3 first-round picks. Other Dogs also making a strong impression here too. What are you expecting from Georgia's Pro Day, which is ongoing as we're doing this show live?
Well, I think it's particularly big for Dan Jackson. I mean, that's a guy that didn't get invited to the NFL Combine, and that seems to be a bit of a storyline, wondering if Dan Jackson will be drafted where. He was voted the most valuable player at his position by his peers at the Senior Bowl, the guys he went up against. So this is kind of an interesting story. Dan is a very popular player. And again, the lack of a combine invite makes today very important for him over there at the facility. Not sure if Jalen Walker does anything. You've heard some reports of a thigh injury. I mean, he's a projected first round. And Mykel Williams had saved his running, I think. Remains to be seen if he'll run. Malachi, a pretty good workout warrior, did pretty decent at the combine. Not really sure what he's got left to prove. You got a couple of guys looking to maybe improve second-day draft stock. Jared Wilson, Tate Ratledge, Dylan Fairchild, maybe Trevor Etienne moves into that second, third-round conversation if he shows well enough, albeit it's a very deep draft. But 14 dogs got invited to the combine, and that's not counting Chaz Chambliss and Dan Jackson, two guys Kirby said will be on rosters. I don't often do this, but today I do want to flip it back on you a little bit. I was listening to the show, and I did SEC Network with Paul Feinbaum. He had a lot of the same tone that you did. I guess I want to go back to 2024. If this is okay, are you okay with me asking you a question about
by all
some
means.
of your? Okay,
by all means.
I'm not sure I agree with the baseline that 2024 was a hiccup, and I'll tell you why. Because I think it's the lay of the land. When I look at the team that won the national championship, I'd say they had a couple hiccups too. Losing to Oregon and losing to Michigan and finishing fourth in their league. I'd say that Oregon had a hiccup going undefeated and get destroyed in the playoff. I'm not sure there's any team, when we look at our baseline for Georgia football, I don't know that it's fair or realistic to look at the 21 and 22 teams anymore, because those teams were created before the NIL era. Now, I fast forward to 2023 and this staff that went undefeated in the regular season. Now, they lost to Bama by 3 in the SEC title game, but I would say that 23 Georgia team, I don't think we were questioning the coaching too much then. Last year, when we think about what went wrong, we think about suspensions to the top 2 receivers. We think about a myriad of injuries to the offensive line. And we look at a hellacious, unprecedented schedule. And I saw a team that won the SEC championship game with their backup quarterback thrown into the game at halftime, trailing against the number 1 defense in the SEC. I dare say the coaches did a good job winning that game. Now, New Orleans, I'm going to call it an outlier. Whether you want to look at the tragedy and the disruption of the schedule, personally, I look at the unfortunate health of Kirby Smart's father, the fact that he missed the walkthrough the day before. I don't think it was Kirby was Kirby. And I'm not making excuses, but I don't think that I can say that last year was an abomination based on the Sugar Bowl and the strange things that happened. A turnover inside your own 25. Notre Dame did drive inside the 25. A fumble inside the 10 when a receiver that's transferred completely blew a block. The first kickoff return for a touchdown in 6 years. I'm not ready to say that because of last year we need to question the coaching staff. Now, I know that there was a lot of people when Mike Bobo was hired, they had a predisposed notion he wasn't the right guy, and a lot of people don't want to let go of that. But I can't blame Mike Bobo for Carson Beck's lack of focus with his NIL dealings, or the drop passes, or the suspensions, or the injuries, or the schedule that was dealt out, and yet and still Georgia won the SEC. So, based on all that, my only point is, this is the defending SEC championship team that had a bad Sugar Bowl. I'm not quite ready to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I do understand the questions, but I think we have to consider the current landscape of college football and say what staff does look bulletproof, what team did have a great 2024 season.
So to be clear, like, I haven't called for Mike Bobo or Stacey Searels to be fired. I think, as you said, Georgia, from a team standpoint, when you won the SEC, you made the college football playoff. I, for the most part, consider that to be a pretty successful season. I'm not like a national champion or bust fan. I think it's possible to have a successful season with something other than a national championship. I think beating Texas twice, winning an SEC, which still matters to me, I think that's a pretty good season. And I think that if Kirby wants to stand pat after that, I think he's well within his rights to do so. So, I'm not necessarily seeking out a coach firing. We've said that plenty of times. But I am also willing to be matter of fact. Georgia did not have a good offensive year in 2024. They were outside the top 100 in rushing per game. Their points per game compared to 2023, far lower than it had been. Yes, it's a tougher schedule, but the flip side of that, does that mean that your numbers were inflated in 2023 against a far easier schedule? There's an opposite side. to that coin. So while I don't approach this from the standpoint of change had to be made the way that some fans have, I do acknowledge the premise that starts that conversation, which is that Georgia was not good by its own standard or by just sort of a nationally elite standard offensively in 2024. And I do believe if they're not better in 2025, the offseason conversation next year, I do believe, will be far different. Hopefully that doesn't become an issue. But on any number of stats, primarily yards per play, points per game, things of that nature, Georgia clearly regressed this past year. And figuring out how to improve on that as you move towards the fall, I believe that's the most important topic for Georgia right now.
And I think that's really fair. I think when we start dialing down into the offensive coordinator, the offensive line coach, when we talk about those injuries and those suspensions, I don't think it's Mike Bobo's fault that Ra Thomas was suspended before the season, or that Colby Young had off-field issues that he's recently been reinstated for, or that Branson Robinson or Rod Robinson had these injuries in the backfield that limited the backfield and the usage of their backs, or that all the offensive linemen, each starter missed at least a week to injury. I don't think I can blame Stacey Searles or Mike Bobo for that. Now, I'm with you. I look at this Georgia football team as is. I don't think a new offensive coordinator can come in here and necessarily wave a magic wand or a new offensive line coach. I think it starts at the top. And I think what we're really questioning, and we talked about it last year, is does Kirby Smart's model work? Is Kirby Smart right to stand pat with this personnel? Should Georgia have been more aggressive and tried to go out and sign some high-dollar free agent difference maker quarterback? Because Gunnar Stockton ain't it. He's not a first-round NFL arm talent. His mobility is good, but it's not great. It's not a guy that's going to put the team on his shoulders. It is an extremely good leader, an extremely learned quarterback who's going to carry out each assignment. But is he big enough? Is he fast enough? Is he talented enough to be a difference maker quarterback? And my answer would be no. And then I would say, what about the supporting cast? You went out and got the second best receiver out of Texas A&M and the second best receiver at USC. Is that enough of an impact? Did we believe that Dylan Bell is going to be a starting NFL receiver one day? Is London Humphreys on the come up? Are these tight ends really that close to Brock Bowers or at all? Or is it wishful thinking that Todd Hartley is some magician of a tight end coach and maybe Georgia just got lucky getting Brock Bowers? Those are the questions I ask, is the personnel, and that starts with Kirby. Now, Kirby will tell you retention is important. He'll tell you he's not going to grab at prima donnas. We heard Dom Lovett telling us, look, Kirby doesn't want prima donnas. He wants receivers that are going to play special teams, be gunners, block. I mean, the most elite receivers out there, that's not exactly their cup of tea. They don't want to play. But Kirby wants this blue-collar, team-oriented, stick it together, a lot of great talent, working hard, the Georgia way, the standard. To me, is that enough? Or does Georgia have to be able to reach for those star free agents like Texas and Ohio State? That's my big picture. I think drilling down into Mike Bobo's play calls, I mean, he called some good plays if the guys would just catch the ball. I mean, honest to goodness, if you go back and look at leading the nation in drops, I don't know a lot of offensive staffs or play callers that could overcome that. So I understand why there's concern. I just wonder if it's a little misplaced and if it's maybe low-hanging fruit when in fact, I think we need to look at the program in its totality and say, can Georgia do it like this? And Kirby seems to think he can. And now the model you've seen, he shifted a lot more in-state kids. This is going to help with retention and controlling costs under the budget. Just published a story about how they're going to distribute this $20.5 million. So I think there's a lot going on, but I'm going to underscore all that and close my argument comment with the fact that there are no great teams in college football anymore. And the offensive numbers were down across the board, largely because of the iPad usage, by the way. But there are no great teams anymore. I don't think you're going to see 21 or 22 Georgia. I don't think you're going to see a repeat. So what I'm saying is Georgia doesn't look as good. I don't think anybody really looks as good. Ohio State looked good at the end of the year, but my goodness, they were terrible against Michigan. So my only point is I think it's really hard to compare Georgia of today to Georgia of yesterday. And I think we need to look at the current college landscape and how this NIL it's brought a lot of great parity about, especially in the SEC.
Yeah, but I'm not interested in like a whole litany of excuses about this kind of stuff. I do want to see improved results, and I don't blame coaches. I want to see improved results. And as far as the statements about the transfers go, I think it's important to be honest about this. There is no hero waiting to walk through that door. There is no like this idea of, well, let's go out and spend big, bring in the best quarterback. Who is that guy? That guy doesn't exist anywhere in college ball right now. The version of that a year ago was Cam Ward, and against a much softer schedule than Georgia, Miami didn't make the playoff, and Ward was probably the biggest franchise, I should say, a transfer, quarterback we've seen in the NIL era, and that turned out not to be a game changer for Miami. Georgia, we would presume, did spend big on quarterback a year ago. That also turned out not to be a game changer for Georgia. Stockton certainly doesn't begin the year listed among the very best quarterbacks, but could he be as good as Will Howard was last year for Ohio State? Howard did not have a great regular season, stepped up big in the playoffs. I believe that's a possibility for Gunnar Stockton. Could he be as good as Jackson Dart was at Ole Miss? Dart may be moving up draft boards right now as much as anybody is. Could Gunnar have as good a year for Georgia this year as Jackson Dart did for Ole Miss a year ago? I believe that's probably a possibility. That when you look at what is actually winning in college football right now, the idea that it's the super lucrative first-round pick quarterback, honestly, for a couple of years now in college football, ever since Bryce Young came and went in college without winning a national championship, the era of like the bonus baby quarterback leading teams to national champions, that is not the era we're currently living in college football.
No, I think that's a fair argument. I'd also point out, though, that when we talk about Will Howard, I would look at that supporting cast and tell you I don't think Georgia's receivers are anywhere near comparable to what Ohio State had last year. And I don't think they had a running back like Quinshon Judkins. Now, I will say I don't think Georgia wins the SEC without Trevor Etienne. I thought that was a really key free agent acquisition. I mean, it's a guy that scored 5 touchdowns in 2 games. He didn't stay healthy all year. But Nate Frazier, I think he has that upside. But he can't do it alone. He's not going to get 20 to 24 touches a game, and I wonder a little bit about the depth. Georgia only signed 1 running back. BA, they signed a 3-star? With the lack of depth that they have in the injury history of the Robinsons, I've got questions about that. And again, I don't think that falls under Stacey Searles or Mike Bobo. I do think there's a lot going on. What I really am not a big fan of, if you will, is saying, well, it's this coach or it's that coach, and if you hire this guy, and I don't think you're doing that, to be clear. But I do think that that's somewhat of the translation that some fans get. Again, it's not just you. I mean, for whatever reason, Feinbaum started his whole show attacking Kirby Smart's staff. I really have no idea why. I guess a lively conversation. But this is the defending SEC championship staff that did it under undue circumstances with arguably the most difficult schedule in the league. I can't ignore what they achieved. And even though it did finish not well in New Orleans. Again, I thought there were some outlier circumstances. I just don't know. I think it's a healthy thing for the standard to be such that we're going to call last year an off year. I think that's dangerous. And now Kirby Smart's got himself to blame. He won back-to-back national titles. But if we're being realistic, to me, winning the SEC championship under those circumstances, I thought was a really good job by the coaches to, like you said, beat Texas twice, dominate Tennessee in a must-win game at a time when it appeared the Dogs were falling out of the playoffs, find a way in 8 overtimes against an upstart Georgia Tech team that had played 1 game in 18 days leading up to the game. I mean, that game was set up for upset. So I guess I looked at the glass half full with the job that Kirby and his staff did without the top 2 receivers, with the injuries on the offensive line, with the lack of depth in the backfield, with a young defense that had to grow as the season progresses, and with a schedule, I dare say Ohio State would not have won the SEC or even made the playoff had they played in the SEC and played Georgia's schedule. So I know where we're at, but somewhere in the back of my mind, what's ticking, and maybe because I work with Steve Spurrier, he left after 12 years. And he left out of the frustration of Florida fans being upset with him having 2 losses in his final season. And he said, you know what? When you have a season like this, I think the Gators were 1 win away from going to a championship game. When you have a season like this and it's not appreciated, it's time to go. This is year 10 for Kirby. Well, and I just want to plant that seed that I think we need to be careful about the criticism and not allowing the expectations to overcome what I thought were pretty healthy results.
Well, be that as it may, speaking of time to go, we're going to have to go now, too. We got guests coming up. Okay. Mike, we'll look forward to reading plenty from you at DawgNation.com and talk to you very soon here on the program.
Thanks, Brandon. I appreciate it, man. Appreciate the convo.
Yes, sir.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Listen, I've said it plenty. We've never called for either of these coaches to be fired. We think that Georgia's been successful enough that Kirby has the right to run this his way. But at the same time, we're not going to excuse make about the results either. Results were not good offensively for Georgia. I mean, facts are facts, and the numbers are easily obtainable on the internet. When you're outside the top 100 in rushing, when your points per game is plummeting, that's not an elite standard, and that's obviously what Georgia aspires to, but that's not an elite standard. Like, we're not going to relitigate that. Georgia did not have a good year offensively. Now, even with that, still found a way to win the SEC, still found a way to beat Texas twice, still found a way to have a season that honestly I left feeling pretty good about. But when you kind of get more granular and you look at the specific stuff related to the offense was not good. And you can talk about, well, the schedule they played and the blah, 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 blah. Listen, these coaches are big boys. I'm not going to defend them. I'm going to let their results do the talking for them. Kirby said this before, let the helmet do the talking. I'm going to let their results do the talking for them. I believe we have a chance to see better results here in 2025. But in terms of relitigating and sort of excuse making and, well, if it wasn't for this, if it wasn't for that, like that's never really been what we're about. We try to be as sort of factual and honest as we can. I'm just not into a whole bunch of excuse making. I'm also not into a whole bunch of like sort of fatalism of, oh, it's just terrible, it's never going to be better. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, that a good season could have been even better with a better offense. And yet the fact that Georgia held it together as well as it did, given the obvious struggles, and the mitigating factors on that side of the ball, including, some very real concerns about all kinds of stuff that we don't have to go back into. Obviously the total picture of what's going on the football team oftentimes is a very complicated thing. All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get Davin because I don't want to keep him waiting. Let me also get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean here. Obviously, we got a great DawgNation cruise here coming up. And if you want more of what you just got from Mike, you want to talk to him about all the stuff that Paul Feinbaum's saying and everything like that, well, listen, on a DawgNation cruise, you get a great chance to do all of that. Mike always holding court, always having a good time. Last night, we had a chance to talk to some of our DawgNation cruisers, unveiling some of the things this year. They're going to make that cruise an amazing experience, including the specially themed DawgNation events. Our buddy Casey that works with us, she's always really, really good about helping us get these things planned and making it as big as we can make it. And obviously, we're taking even more of our DawgNation staff on board Utopia of the Seas with us here this spring. Just going to be a great time. So I want you to have an experience with us on a DawgNation cruise sometime. But if you can't do that this year, I want you to have your experience on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation as soon as you can. Give Jessica Slater a call. Terrific travel agent. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. Whether it's Utopia of the Seas, Icon of the Seas, the debut later on this summer of Star of the Seas, the newest in the Icon class of ships. So much to enjoy on that. Okay, I was going to do a thing related to like some of the big questions for SEC teams this spring as kind of discussed by ESPN. I don't want to keep Davin Bellamy waiting. Let me instead, if we can, bring the music down. I'll bring Davin Bellamy in here because I love this conversation we're able to have with him on a Wednesday. Davin, we appreciate your time. We hope you're doing great. And just thanks for being on the show here today.
Brandon, how's it going, man?
I'm doing great. A hot topic today has been the fact that Kirby Smart sort of pushed back a little bit, not mentioning fans by name necessarily, but the question was based on sort of fan opinion. And you know how this is, Davin. We do this. You have opinions, I have opinions. Sports talk is about just sort of getting in here and letting it fly. And, a lot of fans have been saying, they weren't happy with Mike Bobo, the offensive coordinator, or they weren't happy with Stacey Searles, the offensive line coach. Those are the two guys that probably get the brunt of this criticism. Kirby Smart fires back yesterday and saying, I think I got the best staff in college football. And the fact that we're holding this staff together and bringing back, maintaining this continuity, he says, I think that's a really good thing for our organization and speaks to the strength of our organization. What do you kind of come down on that? How valuable is that retention? And, what about these fans who are still, and it's not the majority, I don't believe, but it's a large enough faction to be noticed that are just a little restless right now based on what they saw last year.
Yeah, man. Well, I mean, first thing first is, the difference between college, and NFL is that continuously having the same team for, 4 years. But When you get to the NFL, you may have a guy that has some contract stuff going on and he wants to go make more money. So you don't really get to see a lot of dynasties at the pro level. You see more dynasties that on the college level, just simply because you can hold that team together and you guys know how each other play. You hear the same message for 4 years. So I think the way Coach Smart is trying to do it is he's trying to keep college football as possible. And the best results when it comes to having the best college football team now is just togetherness. You know, you got guys leaving after 1 year. You got guys playing 7, 8 years. They're on 4 or 5 different programs. Teams aren't, patient with, coaches anymore. So a coach really has 2 years to show some type of progress or he's out of there, where I think Georgia does the best job they can, possible in having all those things stay in place and in-house, because now that you have all this money being spit out, to teams all over. I mean, you got, SMU can now get 5-star recruits. Something has to be the outlier on what makes me a championship winning team, because now they can write the same check that Georgia can. Well, we're going to have to lean our hat on tradition and just togetherness. And I think that's the best way that Coach Smart is trying to do this, by not trying to get caught in the new age of how many players can we pay, to come here. He's trying to keep it as old school as possible, with guys that want to be at Georgia, they're at Georgia, not because of money, and just trying to keep that same crew and same players around for, 3-4 years.
No, I think that's exactly right. And look, I think we sometimes forget that these very young, talented players, because they look so impressive in their uniform, they do bring so much athletic ability. I think we forget there is still a developmental aspect to all of this. And the more you've got, as a head coach, a coaching staff that you trust, that you feel comfortable working with, that you're making your own private individual evaluation of, the process of onboarding new players and kind of getting guys ready for the fall. From a head coaching standpoint, being a part of an organization that I feel comfortable with because I know the guys that I'm working with, it's the same guys I was working with a year ago, there is a point of view here that it makes the developmental part of the spring just a little bit easier to accomplish.
Right, man. It's just like on defense. If I know where I'm lined up and I know the call and I know the playbook and I know my assignment, well, I can play fast. Well, just like when you're trying to run a whole team, how can I get my offense, defense, and special teams, my whole team just comfortable, where they're hearing the same coach year after year. They know everything is in the building. That calms down that anxiety and allows the player to focus on being the best football player as he possibly can. It's impossible to build a championship roster. Not on paper. I'm talking about a championship roster where guys are actually playing for each other. If you got guys coming in year after year, if you got, a coach here and then he leaves and goes, somewhere else. So the best thing is just building that, familiarity with the team. And the best way to do that is having some type of consistency where your players are hearing the same message and they know what to expect of you. You got the Florida State thing last year where they tried to bring in all these portal guys and it just didn't work. Well, I mean, so the best way to, win a championship is not winning it on paper. And I think Coach Smart is going in the right way of doing that.
I think that's really interesting. So I want to talk about Pro Day here for a moment, because here's the thing that always fascinates me about that. I believe we've got some images that we can show of what's happening at Pro Day for Georgia here today. And the part of this that's always so interesting for me is the pressure you must feel as a player. Now, we're in an NIL age now, and so these college players, have been getting paid for a lot longer. And you see some of the action going down right there with some of the 40-yard dash work and some of that kind of stuff ongoing. You love to see that. But I got to imagine, Davin, when you're kind of doing this job interview, when you're talking to some of the GMs, when you're going out there doing those drills, even if you've been training for them, the level of pressure you must feel to perform in a day like this, it must be remarkable.
No, yeah, man. The only pushback I may go against that is, when we were running our 40s, it was literally for, money. And it's like, okay, I can change my life about running this 40. So you put a lot of you put the magnifying glass on, on just really everything.
Yeah.
But now these guys, man, you've kind of been hearing a lot about, and it's just not with Shador, it's with a lot of the players I've been hearing. They're going into these meetings or they're taking these things a little lightly than the classes before them. Well, I mean, this is the first draft class that really kind of already has their brand going on and their pockets are pretty full. And the car that they want or the car that they're training to run the 40 for, they already got. So, I know there's so much pressure on us and the guys where you're kind of doing this as a stability. Like, I'm doing this for mom's house or I'm doing this for XYZ. But now these guys, I mean, they kind of have all that. They probably already bought mom a house. They probably hired mom. They probably already have their dream car. And they probably already have a bank account to where they don't really care if they drop, a couple picks because sometimes some of these guys are taking a pay cut going to the NFL. So, the pressure that we had in these moments, I'm not going to say it's not any pressure there, but just off of the word and the energy that's coming from the combine is that these guys aren't taking it that way. So that makes you honestly perform, even better, that these guys are going to the combine basically financially stable if you're coming from a certain school and you did, your thing.
Yeah.
And all the things that you were stressing about growing up, you've done it in college. So it's kind of a gray area, but I love the way the game is transferred. And I was training, yesterday, and all the college guys, walked in for spring break and they got Louis bags on, G-Wagon. And I'm literally like, this looks like when we train in the offseason and later Floyd and Bud Dupree and Montez Sweat walks in the door. So, I mean, that's just where we at now. So I definitely think those guys are, there's some stress there. But, man, I think they chilling a little bit, man. If I fall a couple picks, I ain't tripping. The G-Wagon's still outside.
No, I get that. We were showing some video earlier. We saw some of the cone drill stuff. So a couple of years ago, I guess it's been more than a couple of years now, I got to go just to Pro Day. I've only been to one Georgia Pro Day. Other media members go all the time. I'm just always doing the show. But I did get to be there for Pro Day a few years ago. And listen, I follow football my whole life, but I don't pretend to be a scout. But when you are there watching what scouts are looking at, I think the sort of short shuttle cone drill type stuff, I think that's some of the most interesting stuff to see, because more so than a 40-yard dash where, there's not that many times in a game where anybody's running 40 yards in a straight line. But when you see the short bursts of lateral quickness, when you just feel the energy coming off the players as they're making these tight turns and the torque they're getting on their body doing that, I just think that, especially if you're lucky enough to be there in person for that, I just think you get such a greater sense of what football really is and the level of athleticism happening laterally and change of direction. To me, that's just what football is. And I've never been a huge combine watcher. I'm not a draft necessarily. But watching some of that sort of short shuttle, cone drill type stuff, I just think you get a much greater sense of kind of how the scouts are sort of separating the wheats from the tares when it comes to some of these athletes in this process.
Right, no doubt. I mean, I'm not really a combine guy, either. I kind of like to watch the tape and see what the guy got. But this separates the generational players from the good players. You may watch a college tape and you got two defensive ends. One runs a 4.7, 4.8. He's 6'4", 250, and he got 7 sacks. And then you go turn the other tape, and the guy's the same size, but he runs 4 flat. Well, I mean, that's an explosive guy. Even though they got the same tape, you look at those numbers and you can now project, this may be a Pro Bowler. He's 19 years old and he's giving us these numbers. That means he's a freak athletically, not just a good football player. So now when you get a freak that can test well and can play well, now you got a Myles Garrett, now you got a Von Miller, now you got Michael Parsons. So those numbers definitely shape it. The test that showed to me, man, I was watching, I was on social media, and some of the guys at the combine, some of the network teams, their media teams decided to run 40 to see if they can beat the fastest, the slowest 40 time. And I think the slowest 40 time was like a 5.1. And it was, of course, ran by a lineman. And you watched all these media people, try to beat this 5.1, and they kept coming in 5.3, 5.4, 5.5. And then when we watch the combine, replay, everyone says, man, he ran 4.8, he's slow. He ran 4.9, he's slow. Or he ran 5 flat. Well, the average human can't even run 5 flat. And you got a lineman that's 6'5", 315 pounds running 5 flat. And it shows you how fast 4.7 and 4.8 really is. And the guys that's running the 4.3s and 4.4s are flying. So I think that test kind of put it to me where it just separates the biggest, slowest guy at the combine is faster than the average non-athlete.
Well, I can promise you this. Yeah. If I ran the 40-yard dash, you'd have to measure with a calendar. So you wouldn't even have a stopwatch out. It'd take me days to probably run a 40-yard dash. Let me also show you this piece of video here. We got Terry Fontenot, the Falcons GM, in Athens a little earlier, kind of seeing some stuff, having a little bit of a chat with Mikael Williams. And, Davin, you know how this is. There are a lot of these Georgia fans that wonder, are the Falcons going to ever make a big move in the draft and bring in a guy like Williams? Now, in this particular case, he'd still have to be available when the Falcons pick there. But a lot of these Georgia fans love the idea of Fontenot talking to Williams and the notion that, and I know obviously Leonard Floyd just came in with Atlanta, and that's a guy that I know you have a lot of respect for. But to see the Falcons make a big move for a Georgia guy in the draft, a lot of Georgia fans ready to see that happen.
Yeah, man, the Falcons have missed out on so many Georgia players, over the just course about like 10 years, man. We just, really even more, man. It's passing up on Todd when we really needed a back. It just goes way back. The Falcons just brought in Leonard Floyd, which is a guaranteed 7-8 sack guy over the last 5 years, but also he's at the age of 32. So I think it would be a beautiful thing to bring Mikael in and have him learn up under Flo and just get him, adjusted to the NFL game speed. But, the Falcons have left a lot of good Georgia players, on the board. But I think this year, if Mikael is still there, that's a pick that we have to go to, man. Maybe with Raheem Morris being, the head coach and having more respect for Georgia players, we may see, the Falcons go grab Mikael, but I definitely think with Leonard Floyd being there and having that vet presence there, but the Falcons also need their pass rusher for the next, 10 years. And we haven't drafted that bona fide blue chip guy, on the edge. And if Mikael's there, man, we can't pass up another dog, man. We can't pass up another dog, especially when you see what the Eagles are doing. We just can't pass up another dog in Atlanta.
Oh, by the way, Raheem Morris on the scene there, too, sporting the Outcast sweatshirt. Hey, let me ask this real quick, Davin. I don't want to keep it too long. Georgia also getting going in spring practice. What do you want to see from these dogs in spring practice over the course of the next couple of weeks?
And I want to see, who's the right receiver, man. Who's going to be the guy that's going to be, on 3rd and 7. Who's going to make those, contested, 50-50, balls. And, man, I just want to see, Gunnar Stockton get his, confidence. We already know he's an athlete that can, make plays downfield. But the thing that we were missing this year was consistency in the passing game, especially in 3rd and long situations. In every game, even though we want to be, your running game is not going to be something you can lay your, hat on. And sometimes your QB got to go back there, and spin it. And so you got to make some, contested, catches. And also on the defensive side of the ball, man, I want to see that pass rusher, that position is wide open. So that's what I'm looking for. If you get the pass pro down and get a guy who can get the quarterback down on the ground, and those two emerge, that's a recipe for, Georgia, a Georgia team.
I think that's great stuff. Davin, I appreciate your time. Always sharp insight. Thanks for being here. We'll look forward to getting a chance to talk to you next week. And as always, just really appreciate you being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
Always. When I see you next week, and go Dogs.
Go Dogs indeed. Great stuff there from Davin Bellamy. You love his insight into Georgia. And honestly, I love talking to guys who've kind of been through a Georgia Pro Day, who've sort of had that experience, who kind of know the pressure that comes with that. We said this before, when it comes to like 40-yard dashes and things like that, you know, it's like 1/10 or a couple of hundredths of a second, sort of the difference between being good and not being good. And so, you know, from that standpoint, Davin's got that personal experience, and we're glad he shares that with us. Let me also give a couple shouts out before we go. Finish Long Drink. Weather is gorgeous here right now. That means you're outside, you're playing golf, you're hanging out on the back patio, you're doing stuff with friends outside. And for me, when you move to that sort of spring time of the year, you get a chance to be outside. This is when the Finish Long Drink, to me, is just at its absolute best. I love it this time of year. I want you to try it as well. You're on the golf course, you're doing whatever you're doing. Finish Long Drink goes with you. Go to thelongdrink.com, put in your zip code. If you haven't tried it before, you can try some today. If you haven't had it in a while, let's get back involved here. Whether you drink it out of the can, you pour it over ice, it's a mixed drink that you don't have to mix yourself. We love the Finish Long Drink, and we think that you will too. Also, our friends at Zagoria Law, the official dog bite injury lawyers of the Georgia Bulldogs. I hope you don't ever get bitten by a dog. I hope you're not ever injured by a dog that wasn't properly cared for by its owner. But if that is your situation, well, you need to know about our friends at Zagoria Law, because like any other personal injury situation, they're going to work to get you the compensation you deserve if this is your story. And we see stuff in the news like this all the time. If it happens to you, you're going to want to know about our friends at Zagoria Law. They literally wrote the book about how to win these kinds of cases, the official dog bite injury lawyers of the Georgia Bulldogs. So give them a call, 833-GA-DOG-BITE. That's D-O-G, 833-GA-DOG-BITE, or online, ZagoriaLaw.com, Z-A-G-O-R-I-A, ZagoriaLaw.com for more on that today. Did not have time for a ton of basketball here today, but Georgia does get going tonight. It's the late game in the SEC tournament. I think that Georgia's done enough to be in the field no matter what. Selection committee doesn't have a great history of moving seeding around on the basis of conference tournaments very much anyway. So for the most part, I believe the hay is in the barn for Georgia, but because of the overall depth in the SEC this year, this has a chance to be a really entertaining SEC basketball tournament. So we'll give a golden shoe out to Georgia basketball. They had kind of a fun graphic up on social media, kind of paying homage to Music City with the vinyl there, and of course the little Nashville imagery around all of that. And of course, tonight, 9:30 p.m. against Oklahoma. I'm guessing we get a little bit of a topsy-turvy result in terms of who actually wins this tournament. And who knows? You never know. Maybe Georgia, who's been playing hot as of late, will stay on a roll here. We'll see them tonight against another sort of bubble-ish team in Oklahoma. Best of luck to the Dogs. Stay up late to see that one. How about the lousy, stinking Gators? Early, late, everything in between. Tough time to be them when it comes to playing Georgian football. How about 1,586 days? That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. It's our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We will look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews cooldown. R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. All right, let's get comments. We'll find out what's on everybody's mind here. And then we'll get ready to bounce out after that. Frederick Meredith mentioning the Philadelphia Eagles. So I was thinking about this. We may do something about this on the show at some point in time. It's a small thing. But, we've obviously made a huge deal about the Eagles, their investment in Georgia, and how well that's worked out. I was noticing the other day, the Commanders just released Jonathan Allen. Washington essentially made years ago not as large, but a pretty significant commitment to drafting Alabama players, much like Philadelphia has drafted the Georgia players. Now, Philly's also drafted some Alabama guys too. But the point is that Washington was like, hey, we're going to go all in on these Alabama players, and we're going to leverage that success here. Honesty compels you to admit that didn't really work out so well. Whereas the championship DNA of Georgia has obviously very much benefited Philadelphia. Couldn't help but notice that. Jake Scheib says that Joe Montana better than Tom Brady. So he's weighing in on the GOAT debate. see what else. Spencer Clark says, I can see the Falcons taking Chaz Chambliss. You know, we talked to Jake Fromm about Chaz yesterday, the fact that a guy that was not invited to the NFL Scouting Combine, but Detroit using one of its top 30 visits on Chaz, so that gives you an idea that the Combine, I mean, we're sort of in a – it's not an NFL show, so frankly I don't care all that much, but we're sort of in a weird stage of just how valuable is the Combine still, you know, what's this worth? So we're still, you know, kind of in that range where, hey, not getting invited to the Combine, I don't think that necessarily makes all that big of a statement about what Chaz or Dan Jackson's NFL future can be. Jerry Dog fan says, is Bobo getting the Stetson Bennett treatment right now? I would say a little bit that's probably true. You know, people forget, and I don't like to bring it back up because, honestly, people just don't want to relive this. But, y'all, I mean, our comment section was on the verge of being miserable the year after Georgia won a national championship. There was so much, and I hate to even use this word. It's like the most like beta word in the world. I can't stand it. But there was so much like toxicity about the Bennett conversation in a year after Georgia had won the national championship. So I guess the difference between, say, Bobo and Bennett is that in this case, Georgia's not coming off a national championship. So the veneer to protect you from that criticism is not quite as, you know, robust as it would have been for Stetson. But people were just, their whole online persona existed around, you know, how much they hated Stetson Bennett for a while. And the Bobo thing is very similar. I mean, and I'll be honest with you, I kind of put myself in a weird position because, you know, I have said on the one hand, given Kirby's success, I don't think he's got to make any coaching changes. And that the guys he's brought in may very well have much better seasons in 2025. On the one hand, I say that. And that gets me a lot of grief from those who are demanding change. On the other hand, I say the numbers are what they are. This was not a good year in 2024 for Georgia offensively. And then I get grief from people who want to always hear that everything is perfect. So I kind of find myself sort of getting arrows in both directions, which I'm fine with. I mean, I have a very thick skin about stuff like that. But ultimately, I'm not going to sit here and excuse make for these millionaires. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to let their performance do the talking for them. I'm going to tell you, as someone who's watched Georgia football pretty closely, be very careful in assuming that you won't see improved play because Georgia has a chance to make, as I should say, a tendency to make its critics look wrong. But, you know, ultimately, I'm not going to sit here and say, well, the schedule made it impossible and the blah, blah, blah. You got to think about that. And then this happened and that happened. These guys are multimillionaires. If they want to defend themselves, they can choose to. And if they don't want to use words to do that, then let their performance provide the defense. But we're just going to call balls and strikes. And that's all we've ever really done. Lewis Sutherland says, I trust Kirby, but watching Bobo call plays where everyone in the stadium knows what's coming is very frustrating. So here's what I'll say about that. And I don't know that this will be much consolation, and people probably won't even agree with me on this. But I think that offensive play calling, more so than anything else in sports, the only thing that comes close are pitching changes. And I'll explain why in a second. When a play call doesn't work in football, the near unanimous response is, well, who would have ever thought that would have worked? You know, you ran the ball. Why didn't you throw it? Or you throw it. Why are we so committed to we got to establish the run? And I mean, there is something that's just revolting about a play call that doesn't work. And I'm talking about whatever level of football. Like we have some big Falcons fans in here, whether it be your team or Georgia or even a high school team. Whatever level of football you're talking about. When you watch a play that doesn't work, it's an assault on the eyes. You know, just getting manhandled at the line of scrimmage by the defense, blowing it up, making it look like they, were in your huddle. Like there is just something so offensive and so revolting, just disgusting about a play call that doesn't work that creates this thing in our mind of, well, who would have ever thought that play would have worked? And I do believe, not just in this case with Bobo, but sort of all fans all the time, that's really unfair. As someone who's done sports talk my entire life, I can't think of a point in time in my career when there wasn't a decent amount of criticism for whoever happened to be calling plays in a given moment for whatever team. It's just sort of the nature of the beast. Play calling that doesn't work is just an abomination. The only thing that comes close is, if you love baseball, when the manager either leaves a pitcher in too long or, in the eyes of others, takes a pitcher out too soon. You take the starter out, bullpen blows the game. Why in the world did this happen? You leave the pitcher in too long. Well, everybody can see that he's gassed. Everybody can see that he's basically used up. Like, that's the other thing that's just like so like, who would have ever thought this would have been a good idea? But obviously the one thing we're not always capable of is realizing the degree to which that hindsight is sort of shaping our opinion on that. And I'm not saying that to Lewis the commenter. I'm saying this is just sort of true in general. As someone who has been a part of sports talk my entire life, basically, and observed the way in which people talk about sports, it's just one of those things I sort of notice. Yeah, so Jay asked, what's the football version of shaking up the lineup when nobody's hitting? It's probably who you distribute the football to, which sort of brings me to what Jay Shipe says. He says, what about getting all those bubble screens blown up? And there is some of that. But, y'all, I mean, I can also cite a lot of other examples where it seems like what I sort of call like the hope and heave offense, where you just sort of sling it, down the field, sort of fade near the sideline. Some of that stuff is, in my mind, like really low percentage. So, I mean, people sort of don't like this, the screen stuff when that doesn't work. But I can also cite sort of like hope and heave chunks way down the field, or I guess it's a chuck way down the field. Some of that kind of stuff sometimes doesn't work either. I mean, every play call that doesn't work, they all seem stupid. They just do. That's just sort of the nature of play calling. Every play call that doesn't work seems stupid. And every play call that does work just seems like a stroke of sheer genius. It's, I think, what sometimes people call survivor bias, that when something works, we have a tendency to sort of retell the story in our mind as if it was always destined to work. And that is just not the way that it is. Brodo Baggins says, I need more bones on my helmet. Yeah, maybe eventually we'll get some more of those. By the way, Darren and Lisa, who gave this to us, they're going to be on our DawgNation cruise coming up here pretty soon. We love that. By the way, we've got commenter on commenter violence here, George on tap, shouting out William Perry, which is very funny. We usually see William at the beginning of the shows. I don't know if William's not able to stick. William also comes on our DawgNation cruise too. I don't know if he's not able to stick around for the full show, but I see him at the beginning of the show a lot. Let's see Facebook here for a moment. Bill Sanders says there's a big difference between a play that simply doesn't work and being so predictable in your pattern of play calls. Everyone in the stadium on television knows what's coming based on down and distance. So here's my opinion on this, and you have every right to disregard it. In fact, many of you will be open. You'll be open in telling me how much you do disregard it. I believe that the so-called predictability of certain things is a little bit of a mirage. I don't think the play calls are as predictive as people think they are. I don't. Like the thing that like Bobo used to get hammered 4 years ago, and honestly, like I was a lot younger back then. My memory's not as great. Probably I'm not meaning this to be a overarching statement on the entire era of Georgia football. But one of the things that he used to sometimes get ragged on was, well, if it's 3rd and 14, the draw play is coming. That's what people would say. And that perhaps was true maybe. But I always sort of thought, well, the issue here is not that you're, having to run that you're running a draw play. The issue is it's 3rd and 14. That, even in an explosive era for offense, 3rd and 14, 3rd and 15, 3rd and whatever, those are not necessarily high percentage plays necessarily. And this is just one of those things that I can't necessarily prove this. I just sort of have a hunch that I don't know. I mean, because the predictability is always the word you hear. I believe that the perception of predictability just sort of comes from the hindsight of, well, who would have ever thought that play would have worked? And listen, stuff like that's why I have a job, so I'm not mad about it. Brian Whitaker says, speaking of leaving pitchers in too long or managing a pitching staff, Brian Snicker is worse at that. Yeah, my general rule on pitching is, and one of these days we'll go off on all this baseball stuff. If you think you should take a pitcher out, you definitely should. Like, if I'm managing, and I've always joked about this, I feel like I could manage it. Like, there's no way I could coach a football game. But I think I could manage a baseball game. I don't know how to tell you how to play, but assuming you're a pro and you already know how to play, I think I can manage a baseball game. But the point is, I'm kidding when I say that. But the point is, you got to have these sort of mindset. Like, if you think you should take a pitcher out, then you probably should. Kent Holcomb checking in from Northside Hospital in Cherokee. Kent, we know you've been going through a health battle these last couple of years. Sounds like you're still fighting and battling right now. Obviously, our prayers are with you. We know how hard you're fighting and all that. We love you, and we're glad that you're still checking in. And hope that you get good reports there from those doctors. I actually know some people at that particular Northside, and they are good people. So I know they'll take good care of you. Now, Matt Rukavina brings up a different point, and I 100% agree with this wholeheartedly. He says, to be fair, remember when Bobo had Todd Gurley on the goal line, game on the line, and what did he do? He called a screen. So I remember the 2014 Georgia-South Carolina game. I remember it very vividly. I loved that Georgia team. For whatever reason, I just thought that Georgia team was so close to being really good. And I felt like a lot of self-inflicted wounds prevented that from happening, including the dadgum administration not supporting Todd Gurley on a bogus autograph charge, which is a different thing for a different day. I wish we had a show in 2014. I would have loved to have had a show in 2014. That was the year before we started, though. The point is, that was, I think, the play calling near the goal line against South Carolina in 2014, which is now 11 years ago, by the way. I think that was fairly indefensible. I do. But I also think otherwise successful people do have bad moments. I mean, honestly, if you look at some of the in-game stuff, every now and then I think that Kirby Smart probably has a bad moment. I don't necessarily judge the quality of a coach by a perfection standard when it comes to individual decisions. And part of the reason why is, and I'm not trying to be preachy, I'm really not, but I have been on the sidelines for games. It is chaos, both sidelines, whether it be Georgia, whether it be somebody else. High school sidelines, same way. Sidelines are chaos. I'm actually surprised they ever get a play into the game or they ever have 11 guys in the field. I mean, it is such football is just different than anything else. Basketball is played with 5 guys. Baseball is played with 9 guys. And as Jay was alluding to before, there's very little change that sometimes goes. In football, you got change happening all the time. So we talk all the time about bad clock management. I actually don't know that any coach is good at clock management. It's just one of those things that there's going to be a little bit of efficiency seepage when it comes to stuff like that. We notice so-called bad clock management. I don't think we recognize good clock management. I don't think it happens very much. In fact, this is another soapbox for a different day. I think the obsession with so-called good clock management is like ruining college basketball. The problem that college basketball has is it's sort of overcoached to begin with. Coaches want to manage every dribble. And so some of the late game stuff, trying to either go 2 for 1 and taking 2 bad shots, or trying to extend a possession longer than it needs to be so that you don't give up a last shot. We're actually, by thinking about clock management, we're actually reducing the quality of play on the floor, and I'm betting you there's a football version of that too. I don't know. I'm on way too many soapboxes at one time. And now you got, as Jay says, college basketball games lasting forever. So watch this and see. Because I used to love college basketball. I still have a little bit of that DNA of I just like the sport. I don't talk about it with y'all. But there's still a part of me that's a little bit of a hoops head when it comes to college basketball. So I notice things about college basketball that I'm not really capable of noticing in football. I probably know more about basketball, the procedure of how it's played. I probably know more about basketball than football, probably. We're getting very, very close to an analytics revolution in college basketball, and it's going to be so gross, and it's going to be just as annoying as all the other analytics revolutions. We're about to see hack-a-shack at the end of halves because these teams are going to want the ball back for a last-second shot, and they're willing to give up points on a free throw line, especially when the point per possession for free throw trips about, 1.4 or something like that. Maybe even a little less. We're about to see hack-a-shack at the end of halves to get the ball back. And now Jay Billis wants to go to quarters, which means you'd have the same thing 4 times a game. Oh, my gosh. The sort of interminable conclusion to the clock in college basketball is about to get worse. I'm regretful to report. All right, let's see what else. By the way, Bill Sanders says, I think it's Bill that says this, when's the last time, Bobo won a national championship? But I don't think that's a fair standard. I really don't. And I am someone who has been very clear that the Georgia offense was not great last year, not as good as even had been the year before. So I'm more than happy to talk about individual criticisms. But, to say that he's not great because he hasn't won a national championship, y'all, Todd Monken came to Georgia because he couldn't get a job somewhere else. I mean, if we're just being honest, like Monken came to Georgia with a bunch of baggage. Listen, I remember doing shows where I was saying, I think this is probably a good hire because I think he brings sort of a fresh perspective and some new blood. But it is not like the entire world thought that Todd Monken was some sort of like diabolical, shrewd move when you hired him. He had been OC at Oklahoma State. He had been fired in the NFL, could not get a job in the NFL. That's why he came to Georgia. So, in comparison to what has been really good, Bobo's resume actually looks pretty good. Think about like a guy like Kevin Steele, for instance, which is a weird thing to say, but like Steele, by the time his tenure at Auburn happened, the boosters there wanted him to be the head coach. But like a couple of years prior to that, as a defensive coordinator, he's given up like 70 points to West Virginia in a bowl game at Clemson. The point is like even the assistant coaches that we would say are generally thought of as pretty good, even they are going to have some blemishes on their resume. Let's see what else. Philip Jordan Wells giving you a Bob Bucher shout out. Toby Trammell says that Monken wanted a break after dealing with turnover-prone Jameis Winston. Like the numbers that Monken had in Tampa were pretty good, but he goes to Cleveland and, listen, Monken, even when he was like, even when stuff was going well here, was a little bit abrasive, and probably that sort of abrasive personality probably worked to his advantage. But even like when things were good, he was still pretty salty. I remember interviewing him at the national championship in L.A., not directed towards me necessarily, but he cursed like 4 times in just like a random interview. Like he's a salty dude. And when you're doing great, and he's obviously doing really well in Baltimore, that's just sort of a quirky personality trait. But the people in Cleveland, I believe, I think they fairly well hated him. And I'm not as plugged into the NFL rumor mill, but I think they were more than happy to tell other people about their dissatisfaction with him. There was all kinds of stuff at the time that sort of came out about that, prior to him coming to Georgia. Monken was in NFL jail for a little while, and that worked out to Georgia's benefit. Darian Davis says, what happened to pitchers pitching complete games or going 8 innings like Maddox and still having 15-plus year careers? Too many divas today. Like, I do get a version of that. And if Greg Maddux was still pitching, I do believe he'd still be pitching perfect games because he was pretty efficient. You know, he knew how to get ground balls. He knew how to induce soft contact. He was just good at something that's obviously pretty hard to do. You know, I mentioned before, you know, analytics revolutions being annoying. I do believe, though, in baseball, one of the things we have learned is that freshness is typically pretty valuable. And the other thing is, and this is the big thing, and you even see this like the high school level. I noticed this. Second and third trip through the lineup, it is a different situation. And y'all watch this. If you watch Georgia or if you watch your local high school team play, or certainly at the major league level, you know, what has happened is these major league managers have seen the data their GMs provided to them. And I do believe, you know, some of that stuff, you know, like the old school baseball guys going to push back on. But the one thing that very few guys now push back on is if you're facing the same hitters for a third time through the lineup, they are just taking different swings at you. They just are. They are taking different swings. And that doesn't mean that you can't, you know, get them out 3 times, but it is a different at bat the third time through. And so that's why you see so many relief pitchers now is they're trying to avoid the third set of hacks for one hitter against the same pitcher because he's just got him figured out. And I think you see this at all levels. I really do. All right, let's see what else. All right, we got to get ready to go. Jay Shipes also mentioned the receivers. Let me also say this, too, is like, for the people who wanted change at Georgia this offseason, it is important to know you did get change. You just didn't get the change that maybe you wanted. But Georgia's bringing in 7 new receivers. I think it's 7. Best crop of high school guys they've ever brought in. You know, former elite recruit in Branch, who's had a couple of nice moments at USC. A guy in Noah Thomas who was productive for an offense that wasn't that great. And, I mean, the buzz around Noah thus far at Georgia has been really good. That last year, Georgia, I think, spent big on a quarterback in the hopes they could elevate the guys around him. That didn't work. This year, it seems like they have spread some money around the receiver position in the hopes that elevates in the other direction. And we'll see if that does work. Jonathan Aaron asking about the possibility that maybe Ringo could start in Philadelphia here this year. Maybe Starks going to Philly. Could be interesting to see. And we said this yesterday, you know, even as the cap goes up and it's going up like gangbusters and that creates more money for the free agents. If you are coming off that world championship, typically speaking, you got some tough decisions to make. And so it looks like that's what the Eagles are doing here right now. All right, let's do one more trip around. We'll get ready to go. Gary Holt checking out. Appreciate that. Bill Sanders says, you know, third trip through the lineup, it's up to the pitcher to make the adjustment. Yeah, I think that teams, and, you know, this is one of those things, I just think this is probably not all the analytic stuff is necessarily wrong, and this is one of those things that's just probably right. That you bring in somebody else, throwing a little harder because he's, fresh out of the bullpen, coming from a little bit of a different arm slot, a little bit different pitch selection. He's just probably got an advantage. Same thing in the playoffs. You know, for like a long time, if you had your ace, you brought him back on 3 days rest because the thought was, well, if you got a Pedro or if you got a Randy Johnson or if you got a Kurt Schilling, if you got one of these guys, obviously the Braves had a lot of these, if you got one of these horses, then you want him on 3 days rest because you want him to go as many times during the series as you can. But honestly, the numbers on this are pretty matter of fact that the sort of A pitcher on 3 days rest compared to the B pitcher on 4 days rest, honestly, the numbers just favor the lesser pitcher on 4 days rest. That's just one of those things. I know we're not a baseball show, but that's just kind of one of those things. Jamie Huff says Dan Jackson ran a 4.4. That's good, right? That's good. And like people don't realize. 4.4 is good, right? That's great, right? Like Jackson's really fast. I mean, people don't like. This was not like some, glorified student trainer, out there on the field. Like Jackson had elite athletic traits. All right. Let's see anything else. Brian Whitaker says he hopes the Hoop Dog is going to win tonight. Me as well. Bill Camacho checking out. Appreciate that. Garrison Tucker says, how many home runs for Austin Riley? It's a great question. You're just hoping for as close to a full season as you can get for him. I still think Austin's one of the best, young talents in the game. I really do. One of my favorite guys, really. All right, we got to go. All right, good stuff. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all that today. Warm weather means AC units. AC units need to be tuned up. You're worried about getting some new life out of your old unit. RS Andrews can show you how to do that. The RS stands for rapid service. That means they show up right away to give you all the service you need. So find them online, rsandrews.com. We'll see you back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you then.